Welcome to the first statement. I call the Home Secretary.
Thank you very much. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will make a statement on the terrorist attack on the 2nd of October and the action this government is taking in response. May I start by calling this attack what it was: an evil act of anti-Semitic terrorism that targeted innocent worshippers on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, and that was carried out by a terrorist pledging his allegiance to the warped ideology of Islamism. Let me pay tribute to the two men who were killed that day, Melvin Kravitz and Adrian Dolby. Their bravery saved countless lives. On behalf of the whole House, I would like to offer my deepest sympathies to their families and their friends. May their memory be a blessing. A further 3 men were seriously injured in the attack. I know all of our thoughts are with them, alongside all those who are caught up in these terrible events. I would like to also thank those whose bravery saved lives: worshippers, staff and volunteers from the Community Security Trust, and the emergency services who acted with speed and the utmost professionalism. This is a moment of profound national sorrow. An attack on our Jewish community is an attack on this entire nation. And it calls on us to assert once more our determination to tackle extremism, anti-Semitism, and hatred wherever it appears. Mr. Speaker, while the events of that day are painful to recount, it is important that we do. On the morning of Thursday, the 2nd of October, a terrorist drove a car at worshippers outside the Heaton Park Hebrew Congregation Synagogue in Crumpsall, Manchester. The driver then left his vehicle, armed with a knife, and resumed his attack. He was wearing what was later determined to be a fake explosive device, though it should be remembered that all present had every reason to believe that bomb was real. When the first call came into the emergency services, Greater Manchester Police declared a major incident and firearms officers were deployed. Within 7 minutes of that call, the attacker had been intercepted and shot dead. Melvin Kravitz was killed by the attacker. Tragically, initial findings now indicate that Adrian Dolby sustained a gunshot wound during the armed police response. As is standard in such cases, an investigation is being carried out by the Independent Office of Police Conduct, the IOPC. But there are 2 things I can say. Firstly, it is important to note that the IOPC has confirmed the officers involved in the response are being treated as witnesses. Secondly, it must be remembered that the police acted in a situation where they believed a terrorist was likely to detonate an explosive device. The necessary processes must now take their course, and I expect the IOPC to complete them as quickly as possible. Mr. Speaker, there is no ambiguity around who is responsible for the deaths and injuries that took place on that day. Members will be aware that the attack was carried out by Jihad al-Shami, a 35-year-old British citizen of Syrian descent. We know he came to this country as a child and was registered as a British citizen while still a minor. He was never referred to the PREVENT programme, nor was he known to counter-terrorism policing or the security services. He had, however, recently been arrested on rape charges for which he was on bail at the time of the attack. Investigators believe the attacker was influenced by extreme Islamist ideology, evident in a 999 call that he made during the incident in which he pledged allegiance to Islamic State. 6 people were arrested following the attack and were released without charge. 1 was subsequently rearrested and has been bailed. I know that there are many questions that the public rightly demand answers to, as do members of this House, and those answers will come. But for now, the investigation is ongoing, and we must allow that work to take its course. We do know that voices in the Jewish community had long been warning that this day would come, and that Jews who had long felt safe in this country, in their country, now no longer do. Now this awful day has come to pass, we must learn from it so that we do everything within our power to ensure it does not happen again. Our immediate priority was to enhance security. Visible officer patrols have been stepped up at synagogues and other sites in Manchester and across the country. Additional support has been made available to more than 500 locations. And while there have been long-standing security arrangements in place with £18 million of funding each year for the Community Security Trust, it is clear that more must be done. We will provide our Jewish community with the protection they deserve, because no one should be forced to live a smaller Jewish life in their country because of the events of October the 2nd. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, our posture at religious sites is one of maximum vigilance. That applies to the Jewish community, and it also applies to British Muslims. I know members across the House will have been disturbed by a suspected arson attack that took place at a mosque in Peacehaven in East Sussex last week. The policing minister visited the mosque and met those forced to flee for their lives in terrifying circumstances, and we have discussed this with my honourable friend, the member for Brighton, Kemp Town and Peacehaven, who I know also visited the mosque on Friday. Let me be clear. Violence directed at any community, be they Jewish or Muslim, of all faiths or none, are attacks on our entire country. I know this country is united in our condemnation of those who seek to divide us, because one of the greatest achievements of this country has been our tolerance, our ability to accept and embrace difference, our generosity towards those who may not look the same, but are encompassed comfortably within a single national identity. It was for that reason that I was so affronted by the protests that took place in the days after the attack. These were a clear source of fear to the Jewish community, grieving just days after an unspeakable tragedy. The same was true on the anniversary of the October the 7th attacks. I described those protests as un-British, and I stand by that. Because those protesters showed none of the generosity of spirit that I love about this country, and they most certainly did their cause no good whatsoever. The right to protest is a fundamental freedom, but it must be balanced against the right the public has to their safety and their security. In my conversations with community leaders and the police in recent days, it is clear that balance has not been struck. For that reason, I can confirm to the House today that we will amend sections 12 and 14 of the Public Order Act 1986. The police will be able to take account of the cumulative impact of frequent protests when considering whether to impose conditions. This will mean that protests that follow the same routes time and again can be forced to change their route or the time of a protest. I am also reviewing all existing legislation to ensure our public order powers are fit for purpose and are being consistently applied. The right to protest must and will be protected. But of all the freedoms we enjoy, none is more precious than the right to live in safety. Mr. Speaker, the government's first responsibility is to keep the public safe. Since 2017, the security service and the police have disrupted more than 40 plots. This work has saved countless lives. Through our counter-terrorism strategy contest, we continue to tackle threats to this country, including those posed by Islamist terrorism, which remains our primary domestic threat. And through programmes like Prevent, we seek to stop the slide into extremism that is drawing in far too many young people today. Once the investigation into this attack is complete, we will know much more about how it took place. But the reality is we now face a domestic terrorist threat in this country that is more complex, less predictable, and harder to detect than ever before. That threat will never be defeated unless we address the hate that fuels it. That means acting on the rising tide of anti-Semitism in this country. Mr. Speaker, I am horrified when I hear our Jewish community talking about their fear in a country that once offered a rare island of sanctuary in an all too often hostile world. We have, in the days since the attack, stepped up our efforts to tackle anti-Semitism wherever it is found, challenging misinformation and hatred in schools, calling on vice-chancellors to do more to protect Jewish students at universities, and calling on local authorities to use their powers to protect the community, as well as reviewing the clearly inadequate regulations that protect Jewish staff and patients in the National Health Service. While these are important steps, more must be done. Anti-Semitism is the oldest hatred. We must now redouble our efforts to fight it once more. Mr. Speaker, terrorists seek one thing: to divide us. They hate a society like ours, where different communities live together in harmony, united by a common identity that transcends the colour of our skin or the nature of our faith. This attack has raised questions that must be answered about the security that we provide to our Jewish community, about how we address a rising tide of anti-Semitism, about how we bring communities together rather than allowing some individuals to separate off into dark corners, including how we tackle the continuing threat of Islamist extremism and those who are pulled towards its warped ideology. But at the same time, we must not let this attack defeat us, nor forget who we really are. Because the real face of this country was not that of the vile monster who conducted this attack. It was those who stood up to him and saved their fellow worshippers. And the emergency services who sprinted towards danger to bring the attack to an end. And the real face of this country wasn't those who took to the streets and protested the very next day, but rather those who were horrified by the attack, stood with their Jewish neighbours and chose the path of solidarity over division. The anti-Semitic terrorist attack of October the 2nd was a horrifying act. In response to it, Mr. Speaker, I hope the whole House can be united in a simple message. To those who seek to divide us by pitting one against another, they will fail. No act of terror will ever defeat us. Mr. Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Home Secretary Criswell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of her statement. At 9:31 on the morning of Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, we saw the sickening terrorist attack on worshippers at Heaton Park synagogue in Manchester by an Islamist extremist. The brutal attack left 2 men dead, Melvin Kravitz and Adrian Dolby. 3 more were injured. Our thoughts and prayers remain with the victims and their families whose lives were so wickedly torn apart on that holy morning. I want to thank Greater Manchester Police and others in the security and emergency services for responding so quickly, and to the brave worshippers inside the synagogue who stopped the attacker from entering. I join with the Home Secretary in saying that I hope the IOPC completes their work quickly, and that the IOPC's conclusions will reflect the fact that police officers acted with courage in what was a very dangerous, unpredictable and fast-moving situation. Sadly, we know that anti-Semitism is at record highs in the UK. The Community Security Trust recorded over 1,500 anti-Semitic incidents across the UK in the first half of this year, the second highest level ever. And Jewish people in our country, tragically, face far higher rates of hate crime than any other community. So we must stand with this country's Jewish community and fight with all our resolve and all our energy the ancient evil of anti-Semitism wherever it is found. It has no place on these shores, not ever. And let's be clear, attacks based on race or religion are totally unacceptable. The recent attack on a mosque in Peacehaven was appalling, and I know all of us will unreservedly condemn it. So everyone in this country, in all communities, including the Muslim community, must have the courage to stand up to extremism wherever we see it. Because standing by and saying nothing when encountering extremism is complicity. And that is why the anti-Semitism that is rife on university campuses must also be fought. The Home Secretary mentioned that in her statement, but will she work with her colleagues in government to withdraw funding from universities that do not do enough to fight anti-Semitism? And we must do more than just call out extremism. Anyone espousing extremist views or who expresses support for terrorism or racial or religious hatred of any kind, including anti-Semitism, who is not a British citizen, should be removed from this country. So will the Home Secretary commit today to using her powers under the 1971 Immigration Act to remove from this country any foreign national who expresses extremist views or sympathy for political violence or terrorism or anti-Semitism or any other form of religious hatred, whether or not the criminal threshold is met? She could make that commitment now, and will she show she is serious about fighting extremism by doing so? I agree with the Home Secretary that the protests on the 7th of October this year, the anniversary of the terrorist murders by Hamas, and just days after the Manchester murders, were appalling, un-British in her words, which I agree with. These protests have continued even after the recent peace agreement relating to Gaza was signed, and of course they started before Israel's military action in Gaza. So in principle, I support her proposed introduction of a new cumulative impact test to sections 12 and 14 of the Public Order Act 1986, but will the Home Secretary also consider expanding that test to also account for intimidation felt by other communities as a result of protest? Does the Home Secretary also agree that anyone expressing support for a prescribed terrorist organisation or who incites violence, for example by calling for jihad or intifada, should be arrested and prosecuted? Since the attack, the police confirmed the attacker pledged allegiance to the Islamic State and was influenced by extreme Islamist ideology, as the Home Secretary acknowledged. Islamist extremism is sadly a threat we know all too well in the United Kingdom. In July, we remembered the 52 people murdered by Islamist terrorists in the 7/7 bombings, which took place 20 years ago, the deadliest terrorist attack committed on British soil. We also remember Sir David Amess, also murdered by an Islamist extremist, and the 22 victims of the Manchester Arena attack, also murdered by an Islamist extremist. We should not be afraid to call out this extremist ideology wherever we see it. It has no place in this country. So will the Home Secretary pledge to drop any definition of Islamophobia which makes calling out Islamist extremism any harder? The fact is, 75% of MI5's terrorism-related caseload is Islamist extremism related, and the vast majority of terrorist murders in the last 25 years were perpetrated by Islamists. Yet only 13% of the Prevent caseload is Islamist related. So what does the Home Secretary propose to do about that? Britain gave perpetrator Jihad al-Shami a home when he arrived here from Syria. He then carried out a brutal attack on a synagogue deliberately targeted at Jewish people on the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. We need to reflect very deeply on the implications of that. So today, Mr. Speaker, we must all stand together and fight the hatred of extremism and terror. Attacks like this are an attack on our whole nation. We will never change our way of life, and we will never allow our fellow citizens to be threatened or attacked simply because of their background. And I know the whole House will want to send out that message today.
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Shadow Home Secretary for his response and the way in which he has made it, and I look forward to working with him and all members across the House as we deal with this, what I hope will always be a shared issue and a shared problem, and where there is agreement and consensus in this House about the measures that we should take. I hope that we can progress those matters quickly. He asked specifically in relation to universities. He will have seen, I hope, the comments comments from my colleague, my friend in the Department for Education, Secretary of State, who's made clear to universities what their responsibilities are. I think it's important that she does that engagement before considering what the measures will be if they fail to take all steps to protect Jewish students on campus. But this government is very clear. Universities already have responsibilities, and they need to demonstrate that they are reflecting those responsibilities and taking appropriate action. He asked a range of questions on other crimes that are being committed. He will, I hope, recognise that this government has worked very closely with policing, despite lots of disquiet in some quarters, in making sure that we have absolutely no tail off in our response to those who support a prescribed terror organisation. He will see that there have been many hundreds of arrests, and as long as people continue to show support for a prescribed organisation, they will face the full force of the law every time they do so. On immigration powers, let me say I'm considering all immigration issues. He will know that for foreign offenders who have both committed a crime and been found guilty in this country, this government has increased deportations of foreign offenders quite significantly than the situation that we inherited. I note his points on the wider powers of the 1971 Immigration Act, which I am reviewing, and I will say more to the House, Mr. Speaker, in due course. He also made a number of points in relation to our proposed amendments for Section 12 and 14 of the Public Order Act. I hope that when we bring those measures forward, they will receive support in this House, and I'm happy to write to him about any of the further details on the Public Order Act, but I am going to review the wider landscape of public order legislation, particularly in relation to cumulative impact of repeat protests. So we're already going to take steps on imposing further conditions and making explicit that cumulative impact is explicitly something that the police should take into account, but I am going to look at the wider framework, and again, Mr. Speaker, I will return to the House in due course with further updates on the legislation. He rightly noted that the protests have continued, Mr. Speaker, both before the peace agreement and after the peace agreement in the Middle East. I think we can conclude that not all of those protesting truly wish to see peace in the Middle East, but that is for them to answer to what their motivations really are. We are very clear that whilst the right to protest is a fundamental freedom in our country, enjoyed by people of all backgrounds, and often the cause of grave offence to other people who live within this country, it does have to be balanced against the right for all people to be able to live in safety. He mentioned Islamist extremism in particular. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear to him and to this House that this government and I myself as the Home Secretary have a very clear-eyed view of where the threats that face this country are coming from. It is true that within our domestic extremism landscape, the largest cohort of work that keeps our security services and counter-terror policing busy is related to Islamist extremism. We will not shy away from confronting those issues and dealing with them in the appropriate way. And I guess what's happened in Manchester on the 2nd of October asks a bigger question of all of us. This threat is something that we have been living with for some time, and we have not yet defeated it. And I commit myself and the government to doing everything in our power to stand up to this particular threat without fear or favour, to destroy it for good. And I would note for this House that the first people that Islamists often suppress, hurt and damage are their fellow Muslims as well. It is in everyone's interests to fight Islamist extremism wherever it is found. There is a wider, more complex domestic extremism picture as well, as the Shadow Secretary of State noted, in relation to extreme right-wing terrorism and an emerging threat of those who don't have a particularly fixed ideology but are fixated on violence. And it is important that all of our response is measured, follows where the risks are coming from, and we are always asking ourselves what action will be ultimately effective in dealing with those threats. And again, we will redouble our efforts to interrogate the assumptions that have been made in the past, whether they need to be changed, and what new effective action must be pursued. And I hope in that task we will have support from those across this House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Graham Stringer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Home Secretary for a statement, and I'm sure on behalf of the people of Crumpsall, where this atrocity took place, they would welcome that statement. The only minor, well, it's not minor, the only thing I would add is that while these acts of anti-Semitism and violence are un-British, I think they're inhuman, and that is a better way to describe them than being un-British. I'd also like to thank the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister for coming to Manchester on the day of this attack. Again, it was much appreciated, and the Home Secretary had a chance to meet the heroes on this day, because while there was violence and tragedy, there were certainly heroes, not least from the members of the congregation, 2 of whom lost their life, who protected other members of the congregation from what would undoubtedly have been more deaths. She also met the CST, the police, the fire brigade, who all played an excellent role in getting to the site of this violence as quickly as they could. I have lived in this community within a stone's throw of that synagogue, most of my adult life. And I have no doubt the community will remain resilient. It's always been resilient, and the film crews who thronged about the area after this violence were amazed that Muslims, Jews, Sikhs, Christians, people of non-religion were consoling each other. There was no hostility at all on the street. The final points I want to make are not as heartwarming as that. There is hurt and anger within the local Jewish community. They've known an attack like this was coming for some time. Obviously, they didn't know when or where, but it has arrived, and they feel that there has developed a hierarchy of racism, that somehow Jew hatred is not as important as other kinds of racism. They feel that there has not been enough done to protect them. The extra security that the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary announced is welcome, but what they're looking for is extra action to deal with religious extremists who are involved in illegal activity, to get to the heart of some of the violent activities against the Jewish community. And the final point I make, in one sense, although it's not been done, taking action against illegal activities is the easier part of it. But partly because of what's happened in Gaza, many people in the country, we've probably all heard it and witnessed it, have thought it's now okay in casual dinner party conversation to make anti-Semitic comments. It's not. It's not okay, although it's not against the law, for artists, if I can use that word, for people like Bob Villan to be operating and spreading their hate on campuses like Manchester University. So finally, can I ask the Home Secretary, will she look forward to a future with me, not only that is free of anti-Semitism, but where I don't have to walk past and drive past Jewish schools with security guards outside?
Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I pay tribute to my honourable friend? He is an assiduous constituency member of Parliament, and I saw for myself firsthand his deep links in the community that he represents in this House, and that he has been a source of real strength in bringing people together in that part of Manchester. let me say to him, one of the things that as a member of an ethnic and faith minority myself that I most hate about our political discourse and our national conversation is this hierarchy of racism. I hate the way that minority communities feel like we're pitted against one another in a fight for attention and in a fight for recognition of the difficulties that we as individual groups might face. I think that racism in all of its forms is abhorrent, and I will be as assiduous in fighting the scourge of anti-Semitism in this country as people might expect me as a Muslim to be in fighting Islamophobia in this country as well. We are all safe when we are all safe, and I will not stand by and watch our communities forced to compete with one another, forced to explain again and again why they are suffering and why they do not feel safe. That is unacceptable to me in 21st century Britain. I will not stand for it, and it will not be the policy position of this government. Let me also say that what happened on the 2nd of October, the person who bears the responsibility for what happened was the terrorist attacker himself. I will not name him again today, Mr. Speaker. But there is no doubt that events in the Middle East have caused tensions here at home, and some have sought to exploit those tensions. And I think it is incredibly important that we are very clear-eyed in holding the line between what could be legitimate critique of the Israeli government, the actions of the war in the Middle East, and against anti-Semitism. You can be a critic of policy in the Middle East without becoming anti-Semitic and hating Jews and holding Jews in this country to account for things that are nothing to do with them in a country elsewhere. And it is incumbent on all of us to hold that line and to be clear where that line is, so that we speak with one voice and give confidence to our minority communities here at home. One of the most devastating things that I heard when I was in Manchester on the day and in the aftermath of the attack, Mr. Speaker, was our Jewish community expressing how they now won't feel unsafe in their own country, but also that they might never see a time when their children don't have to have security when they go to schools. So whilst it is important that in the immediate aftermath of this attack, we do consider security matters, we do consider an enhancement of police presence and enhancing and deepening our work with the Community Security Trust, I will not stop until it becomes the case that you can go to a Jewish synagogue and a school in this country without having to go through a security cordon before you do so.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Max Wilkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of the statement. This is my first duty as the Home Affairs spokesperson for my party, and I only wish it was not in response to such a tragedy. My party's thoughts are with the families of Adrian Dolby and Melvin Kravitz, who were tragically killed. Our thoughts are with those injured, the congregation and the wider Jewish community, which has been the target of vicious attack on its holiest day, Yom Kippur. This attack, we must all be clear, did not happen in a vacuum. Anti-Semitism is widespread on Britain's streets, and British Jews have been living in fear, particularly since Hamas's horrific terror attacks of October the 7th. The Liberal Democrats are committed to ensuring that our Jewish friends and neighbours feel safe walking the streets and worshipping in their synagogues. Those who spread anti-Semitic hatred or incite violence against Jews, whether online, at marches or elsewhere, must be stopped. That is never acceptable. I want to thank the Community Security Trust, as the Shadow Home Secretary did, for their work. They do an incredible job working with the police to protect Jewish community across our country. I also want to praise its collaboration with organisations like Tel Mama, sharing best practices so that both the Jewish communities and the Muslim communities can be better protected. I look forward to visiting the CST's headquarters in the near future as one of my first duties in this role. We cannot ignore, when we discuss this, the issue of protests. The right to peaceful protest is a cornerstone of our democracy, and it is a right the Liberal Democrats will always protect. But the Liberal Democrats are also acutely aware of the fear felt by the Jewish community and the harassment they have felt at some of these marches. We have too often seen these marches hijacked by people spreading anti-Semitism and inciting violence against Jews, as we saw even the night of this appalling attack. My party is unequivocal in its view. Those who incite anti-Semitism and who carry it out must be met with the full force of the law. Now, I say this advisedly, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, the government's decisions recently have led to police arresting pensioners for holding up cardboard signs when they should be protecting all communities, including the Jewish community, from those who would cause harm. This undermines the right to protest and, crucially, means that the police are using their time and resources on other things when they should be protecting people. The British Jewish community should not have to suffer violence or live in fear simply because of their identity. And we need less thoughts and prayers and more action. So will the Secretary of State, the Home Secretary, confirm what additional physical security the Home Office has provided for the Jewish community since the attack? In addition, we must also tackle the underlying root of modern-day anti-Semitism in this country. If the conversations we have make us feel squeamish and lead us to ask questions that promote discomforting answers, as those questions that I've asked recently have, that is all the more reason to have them, and to have them more often. So will the Home Secretary, with the Prime Minister, convene a summit of interfaith leaders, communal bodies, education heads and the security services to really get a grip of this ever-growing crisis of anti-Semitism? Anti-Semitism, terrorism and hatred can be defeated, but only if we stand united against them and stand for the values we as British people hold so dear.
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the spokesman for the Liberal Democrats for his response, and where we agree, I hope we will in future be able to work closely together, particularly on issues in relation to protests and in rebuilding interfaith work in this country, which I think in the last 2 years, as everybody who's been involved in interfaith work, myself included, will acknowledge there have been real challenges and difficulties there, but we have to think more creatively and redouble our efforts to rebuild relationships that have been deeply strained. But I really must say, Mr. Speaker, I cannot accept and leave unchallenged what he had to say about the protests led primarily by the group Defend Our Juries in relation to the proscription of the group Palestine Action. I think the Liberal Democrats have to ask themselves some serious questions. Are they going to stand up for the rule of law in this country? You can, in this House, in this chamber and outside, anyone is free to challenge our terror laws, to say that they should be changed, to suggest that the thresholds are in the wrong place, that they need updating. Fair and legitimate comment. We may disagree, but it is perfectly legitimate to debate that in this House and outside as well. What is not acceptable and what is a crime under the law of our land is to support a proscribed organisation. And members of this House should not feel that they can do anything other than support the law of our land. And so supporting a proscribed organisation, doesn't matter if you think it was the wrong thing to do, it is an offence under our terror laws, and it will always be met with the full force of the law. And I do say to the Liberal Democrats, they really have to decide if they're going to stand up for the rule of law in this country. And if they have things to say about our terror laws, if they have suggestions they want to make, if they have amendments, then do that in the normal way in this House, in the legitimate way, but do not break the rule of law in our country, Mr. Speaker. I think the honourable member is speaking from a sedentary position, suggesting that he thinks that policing the protests where support for a proscribed organisation is shown is somehow a waste of time, and I call it standing up for the rule of law in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the whole House will share my joy at today's release of the hostages in the Middle East. But, Mr. Speaker, as the shocking attack in Manchester last week showed, and as the Home Secretary has made absolutely clear, as has my colleague from Manchester, anti-Semitism is rife and increasing on our own doorstep. May I therefore ask the Home Secretary not only to increase funding for police and security at synagogues, but also Jewish schools like Brodetsky Primary and Leeds Jewish Free School, as well as the Zone Youth Club in my Leeds North East constituency? And would she also consider funding essential, crucial community organisations like the Leeds Jewish Representative Council that are fundamental to community cohesion in Leeds and other cities?
Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure the whole House shares in relief at the release of the hostages after such a long period in captivity and having seen their families go through so much. And we hope and we all pray, I'm sure, that the peace process in the Middle East properly gets underway and that we can see a longer-term resolution as quickly as possible. We have already increased police presence, Mr. Speaker, at synagogues and other locations, other sites of interest, other community institutions for the Jewish community all across the country, and we are in discussion with both the Community Security Trust as well as other community organisations to discuss what the future looks like in terms of security, but also other issues as well, and we will report to the House in due course.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Home Secretary for her statement and the advanced sight I had of it. Whilst I'm very supportive of the work that's being done to increase security at Jewish synagogues and other venues, the answer cannot be constantly more security for the Jewish community. The Jewish community need to be able to live their lives fully, as the Home Secretary said. So what steps is she taking to address the extremist ideology which is both online and in schools and in mosques, and is being perpetrated and addling brains and making people do things that we saw last week, which was just utterly horrendous?
Home Secretary.
I thank the Chair of the Select Committee for her question. She's absolutely right. The answer can't just be more funding for more security. As I said in response to an earlier question, I don't want it to be forever the case that in order for Jewish children to go to their local Jewish school, they always have to walk through a security cordon in order to do so. I think it's right that in this initial response to the attack, we are focused on security, because I think it's important we give confidence to the community, having seen such a horrific terror attack take place. But the future has to look different from the present and also from the past. It's why the government is going to step up our action on tackling anti-Semitism, working closely with the independent advisor, Lord Mann. We've set up an anti-Semitism working group which will make wider societal recommendations, I think, in due course. It's why the Secretary of State for Education has written to universities in particular to remind them of their responsibilities to students. So there is already action taking place based on our current arrangements, but I think there is a question for us to ask about the wider picture and how we really deal with this scourge of anti-Semitism. It has gone on for far too long. It is rising, and we do as a society need to think more carefully and more deeply about how we tackle that hatred and how we bring all of our communities together.
Charlotte Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The perpetrator of the hideous anti-Semitic terror attack on the Jewish community at the Heaton Park shul was on police bail for rape at the time of the attack, joining a long line of terrorists and violent extremists with a documented history of violence against women and girls. Alongside the measures she has outlined today to provide greater protection for our Jewish communities in the wake of this attack, which I welcome, can the Home Secretary please outline if there is any work taking place into misogyny as a risk factor for or nexus into other forms of extremism within our anti-terrorism framework, and what plans the government has to publish an extremism strategy and hate crime action plan?
Home Secretary.
I thank my honourable friend for her question. She's right. The attacker was, at the time of the attack, on police bail for 2 different charges of rape. All of the previous contact that he had with the police is subject to an IOPC investigation. There are 2 planks to the IOPC investigation. The first is the shooting itself, but then also the attacker's previous contact with the police. Once we have that part of the IOPC's work completed, I will be able to give much more detail about the exact nature of those alleged offences and why he was dealt with in the way that he was, and if there are any wider lessons to be drawn from that. Can I assure her that the nexus of misogyny with extremism is something that this government takes very seriously. I'm joined on the front bench today by one of our ministers for victims and safeguarding from the Ministry of Justice, who we work with very closely on these matters, and our next publications, I can assure her, will focus, if possible, if the investigations have taken place, on the lessons that have been learnt from this case.
For the House, Edward Lee.
Of course, we all agree with the Home Secretary, but can we dig a little deeper? There's a reason why the Jewish community is by far our most successful immigrant community, dating from the end of the 19th century. They were determined and are determined to integrate into our society in every single way. But let's be realistic. There are some parts of our community, some communities, who don't integrate. So will the government say unequivocally that if you want to come and live here, you must think of yourself primarily as British? It doesn't matter what your colour is, what your faith is, but you are British. However strongly you feel about Gavs or anything else, you approach all issues with our traditional sense of good humour and tolerance.
Home Secretary.
I thank him for his question. I think everyone across this House can unite around and agree that it's very important that everybody who comes to this country, makes it their home, chooses to raise their family here, commits themselves to being the best of British. That is certainly my own experience as somebody whose parents came to this country in the late 60s and then in the 70s. I think that actually the vast majority of our minority communities are very proud of being British. Every survey I've ever seen of minority communities asking them to describe their Britishness actually often finds a huge pride in Britishness, and also our Union Jack, our flag, our symbol of our nation. There are obviously, though, some issues that we have to confront, and there is a question here to be asked about this attacker who had all of the benefits. He came here as a small child and was a naturalised British citizen whilst he was still a minor. He was under 18 when he became British, and he committed these attacks in his mid-30s. There is a question to ask about what went wrong in that period of his life, in those formative years that made him do such an act. I will ensure that those wider lessons are learned, and I will never shy away from honest conversations about either integration or community cohesion in our country. But I also don't want it to be the case that we allow the actions of a minority to make us believe that our majority are not proud of being British, because my own experience, and I think all of the data shows, the exact opposite is true.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I firstly thank the Home Secretary for her statement and for her visit to Manchester immediately following the attack. In the Jewish community in my constituency in South Manchester, there is a real sense of anxiety and fear, and she's right to identify that. So the message that needs to go out today, and has gone out, I think, across Manchester, is that the people of Manchester are shocked and appalled by this attack and stand with our Jewish neighbours against anti-Semitism and extremism. Now, a number of my constituents in Manchester Withington have asked me to press the Home Secretary to ensure that the Community Security Trust and other community organisations get the full support they need, not just in terms of security, which is obviously important, but in terms of trauma services, mental health support. And I wonder if you can say a little more about that today and give them that reassurance.
Home Secretary.
Thank my honourable friend for his question. Look, I think the volunteers of the Community Security Trust are absolute heroes, and I think they do vital work every single day. And they were there at the site of the attack, and the actions of those volunteers and worshippers at the synagogue in Manchester on the 2nd of October saved many, many lives. So many people were cowering behind the door to the synagogue, keeping it shut and preventing the attacker from entering. What they must have gone through whilst they did so, but they did so in order to keep others safe. They are all heroes. I've been very struck by the conversations I've had with those volunteers. Let me assure him that myself and the Prime Minister have had constant contact with the Community Security Trust and other communal organisations in the Jewish community. We will say more in the coming days and weeks about how we intend to move forward on matters of security and also the wider picture to give reassurance to the Jewish community in this country that they can go about this business safely.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I firstly, on behalf of the Scottish National Party, join the Home Secretary in expressing our solidarity with the Jewish community and horror at the appalling events at the Heaton Park synagogue. This type of anti-Semitic hate must never be allowed to prevail or divide us. In Scotland, the police have increased security in our centres of faith and have asked the public to remain vigilant following this attack. But they should not see that by cracking down on our legitimate right to protest, she is simply giving succour to the haters by allowing them to dictate our approach to protest and alter basic freedoms that we have always enjoyed. Surely that cannot be the intention of this government.
The intention of this government is to make sure that the right balance is struck between our fundamental right to protest and also making sure our communities can go about their business without living in fear of regular weekly protests on their own doorstep. What we are suggesting with the amendments to Section 12 and 14 of the Public Order Act is to make explicit that cumulative impact is something that the police can take into account when imposing conditions. That is not a removal of the right to protest. It's just saying that there are some conditions, the protest can still carry on, but not in a way that prevents other communities from being able to go about their business with safety and with security. I'm surprised. Well, I'm not surprised because it's the Scottish National Party, but I would hope that across this House we can understand that getting the balance right is delicate and it's difficult, and this is as a measure which I think puts us back towards something that looks and feels much more like a balanced situation. Protests go ahead with some conditions. I'd be surprised if that does not get backing from across this House. I hope it does.
Mike Kane.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. During my time in and around public life, Manchester has faced a number of terrorist atrocities. The 92 and 96 IRA bombs, the death of PC Stephen Oak in 2003 at the hands of an Islamic extremist, the 2017 Arena terror attack, and now this vile attack on the Manchester Jewish community. Is the Home Secretary confident that the findings of the failings of the Arena attack have been fully implemented and that there is an equitable distribution of counter-terrorism resources in the United Kingdom?
Secretary.
Thank my honourable friend for that question. I think one of the things that I was very, very clear when I visited soon after the attack was that one of the main findings from the Arena attack was around the ability of the emergency services to respond in a timely way and therefore to save lives. And I can tell him that the emergency service response between the fire service, the police, the ambulance service and everybody else took on board the direct learnings of what happened in the aftermath of the Arena attack. And that is why I pay direct tribute to all of those emergency services, because from the first call coming in to the attacker being shot dead, it was 7 minutes. And the role was played not just by the armed police response, but by the ambulance service and also the fire service as well, who happened actually on that day to be going to a different fire, but rerouted and dealt with the aftermath of this terror attack. So I really do pay tribute, and those are direct learnings from what happened after the Arena attack. On the wider picture, we will know more once all of the facts are in terms of the preparation and the planning of this attack, and I will again inform him and others in the House if I think there are wider lessons to be drawn, but it is a little early in the investigation, I think, to say that at this stage.
Sir Julian Lewis.
As in the case of the attack on Parliament in 2017, this attack was a combination of using a vehicle as a deadly weapon, followed by an attempt to break into the premises and kill people indiscriminately. On both occasions, brave men had to sacrifice their lives to prevent access. Would it not be a sensible first step for all vulnerable premises to have doors that can be easily locked so that people do not put themselves at risk having to physically hold them closed? And may I congratulate the Home Secretary also on an excellent statement.
Secretary.
Thank the honourable member for his question and also his comment. He is right. I think there are wider learnings here. It's why the government has implemented the so-called Martin's Law, which is about making premises safe from attack, and also draws on the learnings from the Manchester Arena attack. That is due to be implemented. I know that there is some concern in the House and elsewhere in the Jewish community, but in other communities as well, about the length of time for implementation, which is up to 24 months, but I will make sure that we interrogate whether that implementation can occur more quickly, and if it can, I will ensure that it does so.
Conor Rand.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as a Greater Manchester Member of Parliament proudly representing a significant Jewish community, I know how much fear and anguish there was already in the community, even before the horrific attack we saw in Crumpsall, as my other Manchester colleagues have already alluded to. As the Home Secretary has outlined, we need actions, not words, to tackle the scourge of rising anti-Semitism. So would the government be able to update the House on the development of our counter-extremism strategy and whether we have responded to previous findings in this regard, for instance in the review conducted by Dame Sarah Khan?
Secretary.
My honourable friend is right. He will have noted the comments I've made earlier in this statement in relation to immediate actions that the government is taking, as well as the wider message to partners across the public sector at universities and the NHS and so on, that we all need to do more to tackle the scourge of anti-Semitism in our country. On counter-terror policy more broadly, I am reviewing myself all of the previous findings that have been made after earlier attacks and also the work of previous experts that have been asked to look into this by both the previous government and our own, to make sure that we have implemented all recommendations that are relevant and that our response is alive to the scale of the challenge. What I'm very clear on is this attack has asked a bigger question of all of us as a country and us as a government specifically on the response to anti-Semitism in particular, and then also the wider questions on integration and community cohesion. I know those things will be subject to further lively debate in this House over the weeks and months to come.
Joy Morrissey.
Thank you. May I, in a rare moment, praise the Home Secretary for what you've done with Palestine Action and taking the steps to preserve the ability of some to protest while stopping the hate speech and all of the things that were coming as a result of those protesters. But will the Home Secretary agree with me that there is a correlation between the rise of anti-Semitism and these protests, and the way that the Jewish community, particularly in London, but I'm sure across Manchester and across the UK, feel afraid to be comfortable in their religion, feel afraid to even wear a yarmulke, feel afraid to identify as Jewish? This is a national disgrace, and I hope that the Home Secretary will move forward in tackling this, not just with words, but with actions.
Secretary.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her comments and her question. It's why I've been so clear that I don't want people in our country, our own citizens, to feel like they have to live a smaller life, hide away who they really are because they are afraid of attack, whether that is verbal or physical, or that they're scared that their children are going to be abused. That is not the future I want for anyone in our country, not in our Jewish community, not in any other community either. It's why I've taken the steps I have on protests. It's why I'm reviewing the wider legislation around protests and also on the thresholds for hate crime, because I know that one of the things that I've been hearing very clearly in the last few days is particular phrases that are used that maybe don't fall within our current legislation and are liable for prosecution but do create huge amounts of fear. I want to review all of that in the round properly to make sure that we have the most robust legal framework that does allow our precious freedoms to be effective for people in our country, that does accept that sometimes people will say things that are offensive, but where we know what the clear line is between that which is offensive and that which is criminal. And once I've completed that review, I will report to the House.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank the Home Secretary for her statement, her excellent statement. I'd like to pay tribute, if I may, to the men who were killed a week or so ago. And send condolences to their family, friends, and also to the wider Jewish community. As the Home Secretary has said, there is no place for hate crime of any sort to any group, to any individual. No place in the UK for this whatsoever. And of course, those who propagate hate must be held to account as well. So in addition to what the Home Secretary is proposing around changes and regulations to the Public Order Act, will she be undertaking a review of the Online Safety Act because this is a key way that messages of hate are propagated, and there's not enough being done to stop it.
Home Secretary.
My honourable friend is right to point out that the online space is a space in which hatred against minority communities runs riot, and you don't have to look that deeply in many of the groups that proliferate online. Whichever other hatred they say they profess, underneath is usually a cesspit of anti-Semitism. It is a huge problem for us. The Online Safety Act has some measures which are designed to begin to address some of the problems that we are seeing. I'm sure there will be more work for us to do in the future. But I think what we must first do is ensure that in our, as it were, real-world space, our legal framework is robust enough to tackle the threats that we see in our country on a daily basis, and then also review how those come to fruition, I guess, much earlier in the process in the online space. But I will be talking to my colleagues across government to ensure we're doing everything we can.
Victoria Collins.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Home Secretary for her statement and join her in expressing solidarity with the Jewish community following this horrific attack. Diving into what's already been mentioned, does the Home Secretary agree that we must urgently address online spaces where hatred is radicalised and amplified? And will she work with the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology to review Ofcom's guidance, and more specifically on categorisation, as under the Online Safety Act, to ensure that small, high-harm platforms are also properly regulated to prevent the radicalisation that leads to such devastating attacks? Thank you.
Secretary.
The Honourable Lady will understand I won't make new policy at the dispatch box today, but I can confirm that I will be talking about these matters to the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, and I do recognise that the online space does pose a very specific challenge on all forms of hatred, but on anti-Semitism in particular, which proliferates across the political spectrum, left, right and everything else in between, and it is something I will be talking to colleagues in government about.
Dr. Peter Prinsley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Tonight, Jews around the world begin the festival of Simchas Torah. 2 years ago on Simchas Torah, we witnessed the worst attack on Jews since the World War II. Today, we express joy at the hostage release, but also great sorrow at the massive loss of life during this terrible war. Now, anti-Semitism is widespread, as we have heard. Jewish children in rural schools, like those in Norfolk and Suffolk, are often the only Jewish children in the school. Indeed, I and my brother were the only Jewish children in our school. What can be done to support our teachers with the skills, the knowledge and the curriculum to educate all of our children on the terrible scourge of anti-Semitism?
Home Secretary.
Thank my honourable friend for his question. The Department for Education and the Secretary of State for Education have already made funding available to schools in order to tackle anti-Semitism within the classroom and to educate teachers on the best way to handle those conversations. I'm sure she will be saying more when she is before the House at next oral questions, but he should rest assured we recognise this as a society-wide problem. There are actions that my colleagues in the Department for Health are taking, particularly around the regulation of doctors, to make sure that our National Health Service is a safe space for patients of every background, including Jewish patients as well, work for Department for Education, as well as other departments as well. This is going to be a whole government response because it's a whole society problem.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the wake of the terrorist attack at Heaton Park, I'm very proud to say that Belmont Shul, in my constituency, hosted at the Sabbat service following a meeting of the Harrow Interfaith Council. People of all religions, representatives of all religions, stood together with the Jewish community, saying that hatred will not be allowed to win. However, the Friday before that Shabbat service, I was horrified by the fact that just before Shabbat came in, I got frantic phone calls saying none of the synagogues had actually had contact from the police as to what would happen the following day. After some frantic phone calls, the police said, we can do drive-bys, we can do various things, but we can't have a permanent presence at the shuls on Shabbat. And the reason why? Because of the demonstration in central London by Palestine in Action, where the police knew they'd have to police these demonstrations and arrest the perpetrators calling out support for prescribed organisations. So I think my constituents and those in London are fed up paying the money for these hate marches and hate demonstrations to take place. So in addition to changing the routes and the meeting places and the times when these demonstrations can take place, how about another suggestion? If they want to organise these hate demonstrations, let them have the bill for the policing that they have to have.
Well said, Bob.
Let me assure him I'm considering all recommendations that have been made by previous advisors to both our administration and the previous Conservative administration. I understand the call for those that do the protest should pay. One of the difficulties is on implementation rather than a disagreement on the substance of that issue. It's one of the things that I'll be looking at in the wider review that I am doing. It's important that whatever action we take doesn't create more work for policing, and it's why I've already had discussions with senior police officers across the country about what we should do going forward, and I can assure him I will review those measures very carefully, bearing in mind all the previous reports that have been written here, and I will ensure that the framework we are left with is one that is robust and also capable of being policed properly by the police themselves and has their confidence as well as that of the communities, because it's important whatever we do we have the resources to meet that. On the specifics of what happened with synagogues in his constituency, if he doesn't mind writing to me, I will make sure he gets a proper response.
Paul Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I pass on my sincere condolences to the families and friends of Melvin Kravitz and Adrian Dolby, some of whom were in the gallery today earlier. But it's also important to mention what my honourable friend from Manchester Blakely said, which was the way Jews, Muslims and Christians came together, united in their revulsion and in their mourning in the wake of this attack. But just a few days before that attack, the punk band Bob Dylan told a concert in Holland, and I quote, "F the Zionists, get out there and fight, get out there and meet them in the streets." That's why I and other members in Greater Manchester have urged Manchester Academy to cancel the Bob Dylan concert that's due next month, because this band are a direct threat to the Jewish community of Manchester. And does the Home Secretary agree with me that that concert should be cancelled?
Home Secretary.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. He will understand that the specific decisions around whether concerts or other cultural events go ahead are independent decisions informed by evidence around the operational requirements of those events. They are made by safety advisory groups in those particular locations. It would be quite wrong of me as a Home Secretary to preempt either those decisions or also call into question the legal basis of those decisions by commenting on those from the dispatch box. It is important those safety advisory groups, wherever they are, take into account all of the factors around some of these cultural events and ensure they take the measures that are required in order to keep our communities safe. That is the job they're supposed to do, is the job that I hope they will do.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Whilst the Prime Minister is swanning around Egypt, shamelessly trying to claim credit for the Gaza-Israel peace deal, we have the Mayor of London stating that the chant "from the rivers to the sea" is not anti-Semitic. Well, I think it is anti-Semitic. Does the Home Secretary agree with me or the Mayor of London?
Home Secretary.
Yeah, I really don't think the honourable member should have lowered the tone in that way. These are very serious matters, and we should all be united in this House in supporting the peace process in the Middle East, which undoubtedly has made progress in the last few days because of the actions of the American president and other partners in the region. One of the reasons why I'm reviewing the wider legislation in this area, including the thresholds for what constitutes a hate crime, is precisely because we have many contested phrases which currently, based on context, fall foul of being prosecuted. And I want to make sure that we have the most robust legal mechanisms, that hate speech and hate crimes are always prosecuted in our country, and those who propagate them do face the full force of the law.
Alex Serval.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to start by praising Melvin Kravitz and Adrian Dolby, who lost their lives defending the lives of others. In my constituency, we have 5 universities with 1,500 Jewish students, more than any other constituency in the country. We also have a Hillel house that was attacked in 2024 after a social media post by a senior politician. What will the Home Secretary do to protect Hillel houses on campuses up and down the country? And will she write to all the Hillel houses, reassuring them of their safety on campus?
I thank my honourable friend for his question. I'm of course happy to support and write in the way that he suggests. I will of course do so in backing the work of the Secretary of State for Education, who has direct responsibility for universities. Let me just place on record, I think some members will have seen that the universities regulator did say on Friday that the Office for Students has powers to fine universities and ultimately to cut off public funding if they fail to uphold their responsibilities to keep students safe, and that includes our Jewish students on campus as well. So it's important that there is a whole society response. The university sector does need to step up, and I will make sure I work closely with the Secretary of State for Education to ensure that is the case.
Rebecca Smith.
Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Clearly, how anti-Semitism is tackled by the police in our communities is key. So I'd be interested to hear from the Home Secretary what specialist training our police forces, and I appreciate this is a bit off-piece, the CPS, maybe the Justice, how it might be put on for a moment, are receiving to understand the complexity of investigating, charging and prosecuting those exhibiting anti-Semitic views early on, as there is a belief amongst the Jewish community that live near my constituency that far too many cases are dropped due to being labelled as having mitigated issues around concerns for Israel.
What I would say to the Honourable Lady is, having discussed these matters with senior police officers across the country, they do often take independent legal advice, but both on the decisions that the police have to make and then also in testing with the Crown Prosecution Service whether a prosecution is likely to result in a conviction. These are contested areas of public and political debate. It's why I want to review for myself the legislation that we have in place and will report to the House in due course.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I join with colleagues in sharing my condolences to the families of those who lost a loved one in the attack last week. Can I also put on record, and I think this whole House would agree, our support for the Community Security Trust, not just for the work they do tirelessly every week at Shul, but also for the cross-community work that they do. So many in our country right now want to divide people, want to find points to bring people against each other. That cross-community work is critical in keeping everybody from our community safe. On that thread then, one of the common themes that is coming out, and I allude to the comments of my colleague from Warrington, is this concern about misogyny and the record of many of those involved in violent offences of violence against women. I know her predecessor was pulling together a counter-terrorism strategy that was going to include this in looking at anti-Semitism and Islamophobia as well, and radical Islam. Could she update us on that review and where things have got to so that we can be confident we will get all of these people off our streets and improve that understanding?
I can reassure her that that nexus between misogyny and in fact other serious offences, including offences related to extremism and terrorism, is something that we take very seriously. If she'll forgive me, having only been in the job a few weeks, I have not yet reviewed all of the counter-terrorist strategy, and it will now need to take account of the things that have happened in Manchester since then. But I can reassure her that our strategy will be published in the usual way, and we will of course consider the wider lessons to be drawn in relation to misogyny and violence against women and girls more broadly as well.
Sammy Wilson.
Speaker, and first of all, can I congratulate the Secretary of State on the forthrightness and the clarity of the message which she has sent from this House today. I think that people in Northern Ireland do appreciate how the deep hurt that is experienced by those who went to worship and found that they were victims of terrorism. We've had people machine-gunned while praying, shot dead as they came out of church and their churches bombed, over 30 years of IRA violence, and we understand that. But will she join me in expressing disgust at those in Northern Ireland who the very same week that this occurred blocked roads and held protests celebrating Hamas terrorists who had carried out the atrocity 2 years previously? And in that kind of anti-Jewish hate, of course, drove the kind of action we saw in Manchester. And will she agree that we cannot allow, under the cloud of free speech, people to use the language which drives the sectarianism which is causing the hatred, the division and the loss of safety in the United Kingdom.
He's right, this country has had to learn painful lessons on sectarianism in the past, and it seems we have to learn them again in a slightly different context today, but this cannot be our reality in the future, and that is work that I hope all of us across this House can unite around. And let me also be clear, anybody who is celebrating and supporting Hamas, that is a proscribed terror organisation in this country. To support that organisation is to break the law of our land, and whenever anybody does so, they should face the full force of the law.
Barry Gardiner.
Deputy Speaker. After the vile attack in Manchester, many of us in this House will have spent time with Jewish friends last week celebrating the festival of Sukkot. And it was particularly emotional to me to do that with friends and to realise that the Sukkah is that temporary shelter where we eat that meal, where you have to have sight of the sky, because the Jewish community need to be ready always to leave. And it's that sense of insecurity that is pervading the Jewish community now, which I believe the Home Secretary must most importantly address. Jews Free School in my constituency, the largest Jewish school in Europe, had a huge police presence outside of it in the afternoon on the Friday after that attack. And that was there to reassure them. But as many have said, that's a reassurance that should not be necessary, and we have to address that fundamental insecurity that the community are facing.
And let me assure him, Madam Deputy Speaker, that whilst in this initial aftermath of the attack, it is important that we focus on reassurance measures and security measures. We are very clear that in the medium to long term, the only way to make sure all of our Jewish community are safe and that Jewish life in Britain can thrive, as it has every right to do so, is to make sure that we tackle the scourge of anti-Semitism across our country and deal with those wider questions of integration and community cohesion as well.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Speaker, can I congratulate the Home Secretary on an excellent statement in which very early on she said that the police officers involved are being treated as witnesses, which is absolutely right. But does she understand that there are many members of the security forces involved in this kind of work who fear they're going to be hung out to dry, and that many of them will not have their fears assuaged by the written ministerial statement today on the legacy of the Troubles, of which more anon? Will she reassure me that everything is being done by the Greater Manchester Police to put an arm around those officers who were directly involved in this, and that they will be given every support that is necessary?
I can assure him that those officers are being supported. It's why I wanted to make clear to the House today they are being treated as witnesses, and it's why I have asked the IOPC to make sure that they conclude this part of their investigation as quickly as possible. There are wider issues around firearms officers in our country having the confidence to do their job. We will soon publish our police accountability review as well, which is designed to make sure that we meet the scale of the challenge in terms of giving our officers the confidence they need to put themselves in danger for the rest of us. There are sometimes questions that have to be answered, and I think we can all accept that that is the case, but we should do that in a framework that commands public support as well as support of the professionals and is done in a timely way so that we can get answers quickly as possible and not have a debilitating impact on policing confidence in the long term.
Clive Efford.
Speaker, can I commend my right honourable friend for her statement and also for a prompt response, which I know was appreciated by people in Manchester on the very day. I believe that people should be able to pursue their religions or none without fear of being intimidated or attacked. I also believe in the freedom of speech and the freedom to protest. But does my right honourable friend agree with me that people cannot use that right to promote hate and to promote violence against people of other religions or any other beliefs? And did she agree with me that we need to keep that under review to ensure that we don't allow those people to continue to promote these messages of hate?
He's right. Protest is a fundamental and precious freedom, and it should be protected, but it does have to be balanced against the need for all of our communities to be able to live in safety and security. It's why I'm doing that review of the wider legislation here, particularly around hate crimes and associated issues, to make sure that we know exactly where that line is, and that line and that careful balance that has to be struck is policed properly, and that prosecutions follow when that line is crossed.
Shirkat Adam.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I recently visited a synagogue in my constituency of Leicester South to celebrate Sukkot. But this year, the celebration was drowned in sadness as we paid respect to the terrorist attacks of two very brave men. We all condemn this attack because, as the Minister said, an attack on our Jewish community is an attack against us all. We are indeed stronger together. But does the Minister agree with me that acts of terrorism should not be used to pit communities against each other, and conflating the right of peaceful protest with the actions of a crazed terrorist, we are in danger of doing just that? So what steps is she taking to ensure there is greater community cohesion that build bridges and not build walls?
I do have to say I disagree with him. I was very clear that the protests that took place immediately after this terror attack, especially in Manchester itself, were fundamentally un-British. I hope he would agree that sometimes imagining it was you that had suffered and extending a hand of friendship, love and solidarity to a community that is suffering is the kind thing to do, it's the right thing to do, it's the British thing to do. And I would have wanted to see organisers of those protests in Manchester in the immediate aftermath of the attack and across the country at least show some of that very British solidarity. That doesn't mean to say that people are not allowed to protest. They are, they have been, I'm sure they will continue to do so. But sometimes I think a little bit of solidarity and kindness can go an awful long way.
Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to extend my condolences to the friends and families of Adrian Dalby and Melvin Kravitz, the people of Manchester and the wider Jewish community across the United Kingdom for the appalling terrorist attack at the synagogue in Heaton Park. Many in the Jewish community felt that this attack was not a matter of if, but when. Of the 1,521 anti-Semitic incidents recorded by the Community Security Trust in the first 6 months of this year, 76 were violent assaults, which were so severe as to be recorded as extreme violence, meaning they involved a threat to gross bodily harm or threat to life. Can my right honourable friend say a little more about what she is doing personally to tackle the scourge of anti-Semitism in our nation?
Well, firstly, let me say, as I have throughout my statement, anti-Semitism is at unacceptable levels. It is rising and has been rising for some time, and it demands a different and new answer from all of us in government and across society in order to tackle it effectively. That means in the immediate aftermath of the terror attack in Manchester that we provide reassurance to the community for their safety and their security, but longer term it means we have to work across government to tackle anti-Semitism wherever we find it, whether that's in the National Health Service, whether that's on our university campuses, whether it's on protests and marches, where we hold the line between action which might be offensive but is lawful and that which is lawful, a hate crime, and must be prosecuted under the law.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Section 12 of the Public Order Act already allows the senior police officer to place conditions on a protest march, such as by rerouting it, if a march will be noisy, disruptive or intimidating. So can the Home Secretary clarify what she meant with her comments about Section 12? When she talks about addressing the cumulative impact of the marches, is she still talking about allowing the rolling anti-Israel marches to go ahead just by different routes? Or does she want to give herself the power to stop them altogether?
The measure that I've announced will be about placing conditions on marches, both under Section 12 and 14 of the Public Order Act. What became very clear to me in the immediate aftermath of the terror attack in Manchester was there was inconsistency of practice across policing forces in the country as to whether cumulative impact could in fact be taken into account when they are making their decisions as to whether to place conditions on a march or a protest or not. The legislation I propose will make explicit that cumulative impact is in and and of itself a feature that policing can take into account in order to put conditions on a march, that it doesn't need to meet any other threshold before conditions could be placed on a march or a protest. On the wider question, that is why I am reviewing the broader legislative framework. I will have more to say about potential bans, although he will know from his own time at the Home Office there are consequences to policing and banning of protests, as well as there are of allowing them to go ahead and having conditions. And again, it's one of those areas where I think a careful balance needs to be struck. I hope there might be cross-party agreement on how we get that careful balance and how we hold it and ensure that the police are able to police effectively wherever we may decide in the future.
Florence Eshalome.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for her statement this afternoon and agree with her that anyone seeking to divide us will only unite us. And I join honourable members in paying tribute to both Melvin and Adrian's families. I also wanted to refer the Home Secretary to the comments from my honourable friend from Manchester, from Withershire and South East, in terms of looking at the issues and policing across the country. Sadly, the Home Secretary will be aware of the recent expose at the Met Police, who are responsible for some of the major counter-terrorism across the country. And it has to be very right that those seeking to protect and people who are reporting hate crime should not be the perpetrators of hate crime. And we saw some disgraceful behaviour in that expose. This week is National Hate Crime Week. Every community should feel confident to report to the police. But we know for every hate crime reported, there are many more going unreported because people do not feel safe and confidence with the police. Will the Home Secretary be looking at that issue in terms of some of the issues across our police forces?
My honourable friend refers to the BBC Panorama expose into the Met Police. This is the first time I'm able to place on the record my views on that matter. I was horrified, like everybody else, particularly at the situation at Charing Cross Police Station, which had been the focus of previous exposés and promises of change. I have discussed these matters with both the Mayor of London and also the Chief of Met Police. I am reassured that they are absolutely clear-eyed about the need to tackle the issues that were exposed in that programme. We are all united in our desire to root out from our police forces all those individuals who hold these horrible attitudes and who we cannot trust to police our communities safely. They have no place in our police service, and I am confident in the work of the Met Police going forward, and also the Mayor of London and other partners working together, that we will get to a place where we can be confident in our police forces, and I hope to work closely with members across this House on that issue as well.
Tom Morrison.
Deputy Speaker, and can I join the Home Secretary in paying tribute to CST and Greater Manchester Emergency Services for their response on the day, and particularly to those brave members of the congregation who ran and protected their fellow members. And can I also thank the Home Secretary for her quick response in coming to Greater Manchester. As a Greater Manchester MP myself, I know it meant a great deal to our community. I'm proud to have Yeshurun Hebrew congregation in my constituency, as well as North Cheshire Jewish Primary School. And I met with the rabbi the Monday before this horrendous attack, and we talked about the genuine fear in our community about the rise in anti-Semitism, which was a horrendous foreshadowing of what would happen at Heaton Park. I completely agree with the Home Secretary's point that more security should not be the answer, but we are in a situation where more security currently is needed. So can I ask her to assure the House that, and the Jewish community that greater resources will be given to CST, the police and local authorities to ensure greater visible protection around our synagogues and our local Jewish schools, not just in the immediate term, but as long as necessary to reassure the community that they are safe.
Let me assure him and the whole House we are discussing these matters closely with the Community Security Trust and with other representatives from the Jewish community. The Prime Minister and I will have more to say in the coming days about the medium-term picture on security and funding for places of worship in our country. Let me assure him this is something that we take very, very seriously. But in the long term, I know he will agree, the place we need to be is not simply providing protective security, but knowing with confidence all of our communities can go about their business without having to go through a security cordon before they do so.
Apsana Begum.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 89 years ago this month, the British Union of Fascists led by Oswald Mosley tried to march through the largely Jewish East End of London. They were marched off by people of Jewish, Irish and working class backgrounds in what became known as the Battle of Cable Street, uniting in protest against anti-Semitism. Following this month's horrific anti-Semitic attack and amidst a surge in the far right's targeting of minorities and the attack at Peacehaven Mosque, does the Home Secretary agree with me that we must tirelessly oppose fascism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia and racism, and also protect the hard-won democratic right to protest, which was crucial to defeating fascists in Cable Street in my area, in a historic act of solidarity and unity in British history?
Well, I think she's right that acts of solidarity between communities to protect each other does reflect the absolute best of our country. As I've said earlier on in my statement, I think that there is a careful balance to be struck between the fundamental freedom and right to protest, sometimes for causes we can all believe in and sometimes for causes that are much more politically contested, but that is a fundamental freedom. It's one of the things that makes this country such a strong and free place to be, but there is a balance between that and the right for all of our communities to go about their business with safety and with security. And that is why I have made the announcement that I have on the Public Order Act, because I think the balance at the moment is in the wrong place, and I think we need to take some steps to correct that.
Sakib Bhatti.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, can I thank the Home Secretary for that statement, but also over the last couple of weeks where she's dealt with an issue that I raised very promptly, and I thank her and her team for that. My thoughts and prayers go out to the Jewish community, and I thank those from the Jewish community who've reached out to me to speak about their concerns. I visited a Jewish school with the CST, and I think it was awful to see children, young British children, having to do drills to protect themselves from a lone wolf attack in 21st century Britain. It is clearly not, we are clearly not in the right place in this. And the sentiment of dealing with the root causes, does she agree with me that interfaith work has fallen off a cliff? That needs to be dealt with. But I'm also concerned about the raising of Palestinian flags in central Birmingham, closer to home, and also the hosting by Preston Council of a known Palestinian terrorist. All of these things contribute to the feeling that I was getting from the Jewish community, which is that they do not feel safe in this country.
Well, look, one of the things that has happened after this attack is it has shone a light on the burden that British Jews bear every single day just in order to live an ordinary Jewish life. And there is nothing worse than imagining little children in our country having to go through drills every day at school in order to keep themselves safe. And I would hope that everyone across this House can commit ourselves collectively to doing everything that we can to root out the evil of anti-Semitism, because no child should have to do what it has become ordinary and normal for British Jewish children in our country. That is a disgrace for us all. It shames us all, and it is something that we absolutely need to work together in order to fix. Let me say on interfaith work, he is right. In the last 2 years, many times people who have done interfaith work for 20 or 30 years have told me it has fallen off a cliff. There are no easy answers for how you get it up and running again. I think it will take careful, delicate work to bring people together again, to rebuild some trust between communities, between our Muslim and our Jewish communities. Let me be frank about that. I think with enough goodwill and a sort of British generosity of spirit, it is possible for us to get that work up and running. I do see it as crucial in tackling the scourge of anti-Semitism, other forms of hatred, and in making sure that our country is a safe place for people of all different communities. And I hope that is something the whole House will support.
Fleur Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I share with members the joy at the hostages being released today, but the sorrow at the loss of Melvyn Kravitz and Adrian Dalby, and my condolences to their families. I join with the Home Secretary in condemning this attack and condemning anti-Semitism and racism. I met with our local rabbi last week to share my solidarity, and I'm so pleased that the congregation have received so many messages of support from across the community, from other faith groups, from the mosque, churches and other groups, and that there's a real support from the local police, which they are very grateful for as well. Does the Home Secretary agree that it's vital that we continue to send a united message that we support the Jewish community and their right to live and worship in safety, and the role we all have here in this place, in workplaces, schools and streets across this country, for we can all play a role in taking action against this?
I think it's natural that after a terror attack we might focus on the actions of those who still wish to cause pain and to do damage to our communities. But she is right. Millions of Brits since that attack have come together in a spirit of solidarity towards one another, whether that's in our churches, whether that's in our synagogues, our mosques and other places of worship, and those places that are community institutions and open to people of all faiths and none. It is those acts of solidarity that will ensure that we can be a strong country going forward.
Jack Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When we allow Islamist hate preachers like Sheikh Al-Faizi to do speaking tours, it is no wonder British Jews in the UK no longer feel safe. In January, he had a platform at the Bridgewater Hall in Manchester, despite the Jewish Representative Council raising their concerns. They were ignored, and in a follow-up meeting, the Chief Executive couldn't care less, a meeting described as an appalling tick-box exercise. It now turns out this Sheikh was one of only 10 people that a terrorist perpetrator of this attack followed on Twitter. There's a chance he was at this event in January. Can the Home Secretary advise what her department is doing to hold Andrew Bolt, the Chief Executive, and trustees of the Bridgewater Hall to account for completely failing to take the concerns of Manchester's Jewish community into consideration? It's not just the hate marches.
Thank him for his question. Forgive me, I do not know the specifics of that particular case. If he will write to me, I will ensure I discuss with the Security Minister and ensure he gets an appropriate response.
Patrick Hurley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Firstly, can I welcome the move to consider cumulative impact when it comes to police and the issues discussed today. It's a hugely positive move, and I hope it can be applied to static protests as well as marches. In the aftermath of the horrific attack on the synagogue earlier this month, the Centre for Countering Digital Hate undertook a piece of research that showed a shocking, but these days sadly not surprising, number of calls for further violence against Jews on the X social media platform. Does the Minister agree with me that those advocating online for the death of Jews and calls for synagogues to be burnt down is exactly the sort of content that the Online Safety Bill is supposed to address? And does she also agree with me that it is utterly reprehensible for anyone to give positive publicity to those on social media calling for people to be killed and for buildings to be burnt down?
On the measures on cumulative impact, yes, they do apply to both static protest and marches. That's why they are measures aimed at both Section 12 and 14 of the Public Order Act. And again, as I said earlier in my statement, I'm very clear that the online space is not going to be a free space for anti-Semitism, which presents itself both on the left and the right and everything in between of the political spectrum. I will discuss these matters with the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
I echo comments across the House and extend my sympathies to the families of everyone affected. We as MPs and other commentators in the public sphere need to be vigilantly alert to the potential consequences of inflammatory language, as we recall, of course, what happened on the 2nd of October. And I would like to thank the Anti-Semitism Policy Trust and their work to show how anti-Semitic tropes place Jewish people in peril and how this is utterly unacceptable. Does she agree, therefore, that with free speech, which we rightly treasure, comes responsibility?
Yes, I do, and it's why I describe those protests in the immediate aftermath of the attacks as un-British. We have our rights, we can choose when to use them, we can choose whether we wish to cause pain to people or not, and I do wish that those individuals who were involved in the protests in the immediate aftermath had chosen to show a sense of British generosity of spirit rather than go on those marches that day.
Laura Kirksley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I share the Home Secretary's condemnation of this terrorist attack, and I was pleased to join my Jewish constituents in solidarity at an event to mark Sukkot this weekend. It was particularly touching that we were joined by people of all faiths, including Hindus and Muslims, and they were there in solidarity, but also with anxieties of their own. One Hindu community representative said to me, "This incident makes us nervous that this could happen to us as well." So can I ask the Home Secretary, does she agree that the government's protections must extend to people of all faiths? And can she say more about what she'll do to ensure that people of all faiths can meet and celebrate and worship without fear?
I agree with my honourable friend. The government's protective security scheme for places of worship is open not just to synagogues but to mosques and other places of worship as well, and already makes significant sums available for the protection of mosques and other temples as well. And we are discussing closely with representatives from the community about what we might need to do going forward.
Monica Harding.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I associate myself with the tributes of those that were killed in Manchester, and also the invaluable work of the Community Security Trust, whose headquarters I'd visited, and my constituents in Esher and Walton, who have sent a wall of love and support in messages to our local synagogues, showing how they absolutely reject anti-Semitism. The Manchester attacker was wielding a knife. My local police force in Esher and Walton have stressed to me the ease in which someone can obtain lethal knives, even with a pattern of criminal behaviour. We do not know what kind of knife it was or how they obtained it, but we do know that the Southport attacker purchased a 16-inch machete from Knife Warehouse, a retailer which, in the words of the inquiry chair, showed no curiosity at all about who it was selling it to. So it is clear that those who intend to commit violence can arm themselves with alarming ease, exploiting online loopholes that treat lethal weapons as ordinary products. Does the Secretary of State agree that we now need a far stronger and clearer approach to tackle the online sale and circulation of these knives, and to close the gaps that allow sellers to profit from them?
She will know we're already taking action in the Crime and Policing Bill in order to ban the sale of those knives. It is a little too early to draw wider lessons about exactly what happened in this case, but once more of the facts are in, I'm sure we will return to these matters in due course.
David Pinter-Dushinsky.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to commend the Home Secretary for her statement and join with her both in condemning this despicable attack and in sending my condolences to the families of Melvin Kravitz and Adrian Dalby. They are heroes. May their memory be a blessing. In Hendon, we have one of the largest Jewish communities in the country. Many of my constituents are scared, and I must tell the House in all candour that more than a few are asking whether there's a future for them and their families in this country. One of the sources of concern is the fear about bias towards Jewish patients in the NHS. Can the Home Secretary expand on the action the government is taking to ensure that all may be treated in the NHS without fear, and to stamp out anti-Semitism in our health system?
Well, let me say to me, it is an absolute outrage that any patient in our country might be afraid of seeking treatment in our National Health Service because of the expressed views of the person who is treating them. And we are determined to make sure that that is not something that anyone in our country, including in our Jewish community, has to go through. And it's why the Health Secretary has already announced that he will be overhauling the regulatory system for medical practitioners. I'm sure he will come to the House in due course to give more details of that plan.
Dr Ali Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Green Party stands shoulder to shoulder in cross-party solidarity with the victims and survivors of the horrific attack on the Heaton Park synagogue, and I'd like to pay tribute particularly to those who put their own lives at risk to bring it to a swift stop. The Home Secretary today has spoken passionately and personally on the point that the fight against the scourge of anti-Semitism is the same as the fight against any form of prejudice. I very much welcome that, and I'm sure she will agree with me that it's essential to say loud and clear and unequivocally that prejudice, hatred or violence against Jewish people is totally unacceptable in our country and will not be tolerated. The Home Secretary has used this opportunity, this moment today, to announce further restrictions on protests, which I confess do concern me. Important points have been raised in the Chamber today regarding the radicalisation within online spaces. Important points have been raised regarding radicalisation within online spaces. I would like to ask the Home Secretary, will she ensure that every policy measure she takes is focused on building solidarity between communities and countering division in our country?
I agreed with everything she said until she got to restriction on protest, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let me just be clear. There is a balance to be struck between these freedoms. I think it's in the wrong place. I'm taking measures to bring it back into balance. I just repeat the points I've already made about the online environment, and it is something I will discuss with colleagues across government.
Melanie Ward.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My condolences and solidarity, and that of my constituents, is with the Jewish community in Manchester in the wake of these terrible terrorist attacks. The Home Secretary mentioned regulators, and regulators such as Ofcom have a hugely important role in tackling anti-Semitism, not least online harm and hatred, as has been raised by the Anti-Semitism Policy Trust. Can she give an assurance that the Government has a plan to ensure that regulators are playing their full role in addressing the poison of anti-Semitism?
Hear, hear. Why my colleagues in the Cabinet have been writing to the different regulators that report directly to them, and I know that they will all come before this House to set out the further measures and also the way in which we're going to hold people accountable for the powers that they have.
Jim Allister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, does the Home Secretary agree that the murderous attack on the Jewish community in Manchester was the product of the rampant Islamic radicalisation that we've seen across our country, something which chimes with the anti-Semitism that's been evidenced in the bitter hate marches in our capital city? And in that context, is enough being done to deal with the radicalisers? Do we not need to strike the axe at the root of this problem? And much of that root is those who are radicalising young people to do awful acts such as this.
Well, I would repeat to him the comment I made earlier in my statement on dealing with the domestic threats that we face, the largest of which is Islamist extremism. We will know more about the specific journey this particular attacker took before he carried out his attack when more of the facts are in, but I can assure him whatever wider lessons there are to be drawn from this attack, I will make sure that those are understood and learned from, and that we have the measures in place to be effective in dealing with radicalisation wherever it takes place, including Islamist extremism.
Mark Sewards.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I do want to pay tribute to the Leeds Jewish Representative Council and the Jewish Leadership Council for organising moving tributes in memory of the victims of the Manchester attacks. I also thank CST for their tireless work to keep the community safe. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sorry to say that a few weeks ago, a speaker on the streets of Leeds during one of the protests called for all synagogues and all Jewish schools to be held to account for the crime of, as they say, harbouring Zionists. Shameful. This was the thinnest of veils, draped over an excuse to legitimise targeting the Jewish community. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that there is absolutely no place for such calls on the streets of Leeds or anywhere in the UK? And will she do everything in her power to enable the police to ensure that it doesn't happen again to keep the Jewish community safe?
I agree with him. Those comments are despicable and utterly unacceptable, and it's why I'm reviewing the wider legislative framework that we have in relation to both protests and also hate crime.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I, first of all, give my condolences to those who lost their lives as a result of the Manchester synagogue attack, and to those who suffer the trauma and the loss of their family. Can I thank the Secretary of State very much for the strong and emphatic statement, and the Secretary of State today speaks for everyone in this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland when it comes to condemning strongly by her words. I was absolutely sickened and shocked to hear the report on the Yom Kippur of the attack on Manchester and the loss of life that ensued. And it is an established fact, of course, that anti-Semitism in the UK is once again on the rise to such an extent that there are security details at all religious events. I can well remember in Northern Ireland after the Darkday Hall massacre, many churches, indeed probably all churches across Northern Ireland, who had extra security details on their church doors. But those dark days are behind us in Northern Ireland. But they're not behind our Jewish friends, and we've witnessed that in the last few times. So they require action, not words, and above all, honesty about the threat level against them. Just how will the Secretary of State provide assurances to the Jewish communities that are more than media soundbites, but are promises of safety that can be trusted? Thank you.
I can assure him and the House that this government will have action. We've already taken action. There will be more to come, and I know that will be debated in this House over the coming weeks and months, but this is not a moment for warm words. It is a moment for strong action, and that is what this government will deliver.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I agree with the Home Secretary that violence directed at any community, be they Jewish or Muslim, of all faiths or none, are attacks on our entire country, and we're united in condemnation of those who seek to divide us. And in fact, in Luton, we have strong cohesion because we have worked for many years to build it. Yet recent events, combined with increasingly open far-right and racist rhetoric, have left many feeling scared and vulnerable. Bedfordshire Police have stepped up patrols around different places of worship, but resources are limited. But I welcome the Home Secretary's comments to say this is being looked at. So can I ask her about any cross-government work around the community cohesion building that is done by our voluntary and community sector and support for that?
Community cohesion is going to be absolutely vital, and it'll be an important element of work that we have to take forward in the light of the attack that has taken place. I'm happy to discuss with her and make sure she gets a meeting with the relevant minister to feed in the experience of those in Luton.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I join the Home Secretary and all members across the House in my unequivocal condemnation of the heinous terrorist and anti-Semitic attack against Jewish worshippers in Manchester, and I express my heartfelt condolences to the family and friends of Mr Dalby and Mr Kravitz. As a proud British Muslim, I would like to remind the House and those listening, the actions of these so-called Islamist terrorists were vile, unacceptable, but they have nothing to do with the religion of Islam and are actually in total contradiction to the teachings of Islam and the obligations of all Muslims. In my constituency of Dewsbury and Batley and across the country, Muslims join the Jewish community in being saddened and angered by the terrorist attack in Manchester and in any and all hatred and violence expressed against any community, and we stand in full solidarity with them. Will the Home Secretary said that the terrorist was not known to the police or to the Prevent programme. So will she advise this House what steps are being taken to address any gaps identified in our preventative measures so that such acts of terrorism cannot happen again?
The attacker was not known to counter-terror policing and had not been referred to the Prevent programme. Once all of the facts are in, we will be able to draw wider lessons. If we didn't know, as we didn't know him, the question will be, should he have been on our radar? And that is a question that myself and others in our security services will take very seriously. He was, of course, known to the police in the context of those 2 charges for rape. And the IOPC will now investigate all of his previous history in a non-terror context with the police so that we can draw those wider lessons.
Dr Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to start by thanking the Home Secretary for her statement and paying tribute to everyone who helped defeat the attack last week. I'd also like to pay tribute for the Home Secretary for the leadership she's shown so early in the post. It's been fantastic, actually. But in her earlier reply, she lamented the decline in interfaith work across the UK. In Edinburgh, it's never been going stronger. The Edinburgh Interfaith Association do fantastic work to ensure Edinburgh is an inclusive city, and I want to formally invite her to meet them to learn about their work. Nonetheless, the Jewish community in Edinburgh are concerned about the rise in anti-Semitism. I met them last weekend, and I spoke to a young man who's proud to be Jewish, but he said he could not live his life openly. He was Jewish in the closet, was the phrase that he used, and I felt ashamed. So I welcome that the Home Secretary is looking at the threshold for hate crime, but can she reassure us that she'll be speaking to the devolved administrations to make sure we get this right across the UK? Thank you.
Speaking to all of our colleagues in the devolved administrations, and happy to discuss with him the wider lessons on interfaith work to be drawn from his own experience.
Luke Charters.
Speaker, the horrific terrorist attack at Heaton Park follows a decade where anti-Semitism has increased nearly every year, and the CST has confirmed that anti-Semitism is increasing on university campuses. In York, we have 2 fantastic universities where anti-Semitism has no place. Will my right honourable friend commit to working with the Secretary of State for Education to ensure that the universities across the country have all they need to root out anti-Semitism for good?
Yes, absolutely.
Jim Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On an inspiring visit this weekend to Bromley Reform Synagogue, which serves my constituents in Dartford alongside the honourable members for Beckenham and Penge and Bromley and Biggin Hill, I was moved by the strong views of the congregation rejecting hatred across all religions and communities in our country. Can the Home Secretary, following her excellent statement, agree with me that it's vital we send a message to the Jewish community and every other community in this country that they will be safe and that the government stands with them?
Hear, hear.
I agree with my honourable friend, and I hope that that message has been heard today. There is obviously much work for us to do, but this government will not shy away from doing it.
Kevin Bonavia.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Home Secretary for a very powerful statement. I also send my condolences to those grieving for their loved ones in that horrific terrorist attack, an attack which has realised the fears of our Jewish community across this country. A constituent of mine in Stevenage wrote to me straight after that to say how scared she was for her husband who had gone to do security at Yom Kippur that evening. She also told me about how classmates of her son at school had wished he'd died in the Holocaust. She also told me about how people, other classmates, were talking about anti-Semitic comments during lessons of the Second World War. She also told me about not disclosing the fact that her daughter's party was for a bat mitzvah because she was scared about the response in that. These are the fears that our Jewish community are facing. So while I welcome all that this government is doing in its deeds, in law and in its resources, the harder thing is how do we call out these small acts, so-called small acts of anti-Semitism, because they start that way, but where do they end? So I would ask the Home Secretary, how can we encourage all of us to call that out?
Well, no act of anti-Semitism, big or small, is acceptable, and we must all call it out and challenge it wherever we see it. This government will act. We are already taking measures. We will take more in order to strengthen the response to rising anti-Semitism in our country. And let me assure him, the testimony from his constituent is devastating for all of us. It is a source of national shame that our fellow citizens feel that they have to hide in this way, hide who they are in this way, and we must all commit ourselves to doing everything in our collective power to ensure that our Jewish community can live a full Jewish life here in Britain in the 21st century.
Final question, Luke Meyer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Home Secretary's statement today. Does she agree with me that slogans such as "Glory to our martyrs," "Globalise the Intifada" and "Zionists off our streets" are unacceptable and likely to encourage unstable individuals to carry out horrific actions and attacks on the Jewish people, such as the one we saw so recently?
Yeah, let me reassure him I am carrying out a review of the wider legislation around protests and thresholds for hate crime legislation to make sure that all of our legal framework is as robust as it needs to be so that we can strike that careful balance between our freedom of protest, our freedom of speech, but also keeping all of our communities safe.
Right, we'll let the front benches change over.